Welcome back to The Left Field, the podcast where three friends get together and discuss their faculty Congress League and what the Democrats have been up to from a leftist perspective. We're your hosts. I'm not Chandan Habale. I am Luis Pagan.
I'm Alexi Jenkins.
And I am Chandan Habale.
Himanshu Pandey has not been voted off the island. He'll be back next week.
So I think the lowest scoring team right now on Fantasy Congress is the team is Mitch's Bitches. Mitch's Bitches are in last place, which is,
Mitch's Bitches been consistently in last place, actually.
Followed closely by myself.
All three of you. Holy crap.
Yeah, I'm at the halfway point. I'm number 6 out of 11.
No, you're left with, yeah, okay, you're halfway.
And then you, a number 2, the speaker for the trees.
I'm consistent number 2.
I feel like my team has been ping-ponging between the top and the bottom these past couple of weeks. I don't really know what happened.
Mine has not. It's been consistent.
Maisie Hirona got me 1 point last week, which I was super disappointed about. If it wasn't for that.
Holy shit, 1 point?
1 point.
Yikes.
I got a bunch of points in the House last week. They actually passed a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, the House had a surprisingly productive week.
But then you look at the Senate and it's like, yes, roll calls. And that's it.
I think the House is just typically way more productive than the Senate.
There's just not much you can do when you're being filibustered constantly.
I mean, they have the power to bring anything they want to the floor. Just saying.
Well, the only things that I can see that they actually did were confirming Deb Haaland, which fantastic. About time that we had a Native American, actually as a major player in the executive branch. And then they also passed, or they nominated Catherine C. Tai to be the U.S. trade representative. And she recently worked with trade deals in China. So we will see how she does.
One of the things that I think is super noteworthy about Deb Haaland's appointment is that the department that she leads that is in charge of Native American affairs is the Department of the Interior, which just explicitly shows you how the United States government does not take any of its treaties with Native American tribes seriously because those treaties guarantee that Native American tribes are considered sovereign nations, not part of the United States. Obviously, it's a bit of a special status because they are within the United States, but they're supposed to be treated as their own distinct entities. So classifying them as part of the Interior rather than classifying them under the Secretary of State's office and having a subdepartment within there just kind of shows the US government's hand.
So apparently Deb Haaland's actually not the first major Native person in American government. There was I think it was a vice president.
Charles Curtis, supposed first vice president of color. From what I can see here, his mother was a quarter Kaw, the tribe also known as Kanza or Kanza. So that makes him 1/8 Native.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a little bit too. My great grandma was a Cherokee princess.
I mean, I'm twice as Serbian as that, and I'm not that Serbian. So
pretty low in the blood quantum there. But yeah, he believed that Indians could benefit from mainstream education and assimilation. So yeah, overall bad.
Assimilation. Woof.
Also, just worthy of noting that Native American tradition generally, obviously that encompasses hundreds and hundreds of tribes, but generally don't think of people's relationship to the tribe as having to do with a percentage of their blood that is quote unquote native blood. That is very Western construction. It has a lot more to do with your relationship with the tribe and that sense of community. But yeah, I just wanted to point out that distinction.
Yeah, I mean, just doing a little bit of research here, he did speak Kanza, and apparently he did spend some time on the Kaw reservation, but it doesn't seem like there's that much information.
Yeah, he was enrolled in the Kaw Nation.
And he was vice president to which president?
Herbert Hoover.
Hoover. Hoover.
I know, not a great one.
I mean, are there any great ones, truly?
Good question. They've all got something.
To dig into the legislation from the week beyond the confirmations, The Senate did not do a lot. Once again, the Senate's batting average for bill passages is very, very low. They had 7 pieces of legislation total, but only 1 piece of legislation that was substantive. This is the Save Lives Act, which we talked about in a previous episode. The House passed it first and sent it over to the Senate. So the Save Lives Act authorizes the Veteran Affairs Department to give vaccines to veterans. So the Senate is not generating a lot of legislation that they're actually putting into action. It's been mostly responsive. And as we talked about before, there's a big pileup of House bills that are just waiting to be heard in the Senate. So the House, unlike the Senate, was actually pretty productive last week. There were 16 pieces of legislation, and of those 16, a full 10 were actual substantive bills. Wow. So I'll just try to give as quick of a possible rundown, just so people know like what topics we're seeing action on and what things are actually getting dealt with. So the first one is HR 485, the Stronger Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, and that requires the Department of Health and Human Services to track and report child fatalities as a result of maltreatment. Then we have HR 1799, the PPP Extension Act of 2021, and that extends the PPP program, or the Paycheck Protection Program, loan application deadline to May 31st, and also gives the Small Business Administration another month to process the loan. So they have until June. Then we have HR 1085, which awarded congressional gold medals to the Capitol Police who protected lawmakers during the January 6th Capitol riot. Then HR 1620, which was the reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act. For those of our listeners who aren't familiar with the Violence Against Women Act, it's this really big piece of legislation that essentially provides protection for women from domestic violence and stalking. So that would be expanded under this bill. HR 1651, which is the COVID-19 Bankruptcy Relief Extension Act. Like the PPP Act, this is extending previous COVID relief. So it extends the CARE Act bankruptcy protection until March 27th, 2022. Then we have HR 1652, which is this one gets very technical, so bear with me. The VOCA Fix to Sustain the Crime Victims Fund Act. So VOCA is the Victims of Crime Act, which allows for payouts for crime victims based on funds collected for criminal fines, penalties, forfeited bail bonds, and other fees collected by the federal government. So this act, just very technical, like kind of changes the funding stream to ensure that program is funded. Then we have 2 really important pieces of immigration legislation that we'll get into a bit later. So HR 6, which is the American Dream and Promise Act, and HR 1603, which is the Farm Workforce Modernization Act. And only 2 more, we're getting there. HR 1112, which is the Protect Democracy in Burma Act, and that condemns the coup in Burma and urges the release of elected leaders and citizens who are currently being detained in prison. For those of our listeners who haven't heard about the situation in Burma, there was a military coup where they overthrew the government, and there have been waves of protests by civilians that have been cracked down extremely hard by the military police. Lots of young people have been killed in those protests, and at this point, individuals don't even feel safe going out to protest anymore. So some people are putting up dolls. They're these special round dolls that they put up to represent them in protest. And when the police knock the dolls over, because they're round, they bounce back up. So really creative, symbolic protests. What the people are doing there is amazing. And it's a very scary time for a country that's been pretty politically unstable for a long period of time. Finally, we have HR 1868, and that prevents across-the-board direct spending cuts from the stimulus. So a lot of legislation, little winded from covering it all, but I'm happy that the House is passing a lot more things, and I hope the Senate gets its shit together, honestly, because this is embarrassing.
Yeah, I mean, as we all know, that all of this is going to come down to the filibuster, which it seems more and more likely that they're going to move back to a talking filibuster, which is their old school method of you control the floor as long as you're continuing talking as a way to delay a vote. I think at the end of the day, those mostly end up being symbolic, because unless you're at the very end of the legislative session, at the end of your filibuster, someone's going to just call that to a vote.
It's physically impossible to filibuster forever, just because of like the human body's limitations, because you literally have to be on the floor constantly. But yeah, that is the quote unquote solution that Joe Biden came out in support of this past week. Kind of mind blowing that this is the first time he's taken a position on the filibuster since his administration and their report card is directly connected to the filibuster and what the Senate is able to accomplish. So he did not come out in favor of full abolition of the filibuster. He supported, like Louise said, the talking filibuster. So it's something.
It's a step. At least the Republicans can embarrass themselves.
Yeah, truly. I think they're afraid of, like, because it's so close right now, it's literally 50-50. And that's, I mean, it's really 48-50 because there's two independents. And Angus King, which is one of the people who actually voted against the $15 minimum wage, is one of those 15 or one of those two independents. So, you know, I think we've got Bernie stronghold there, but I think they're afraid if like we like lose, you know, literally 1 or 2 seats in, you know, in the next election cycle, then they can take advantage, you know, Republicans take advantage of like the 50, but it's just regular democracy, you know, it's just like, they're afraid of regular democracy happening.
It's not an excuse because we have the governing authority right now. So Democrats are always putting things off until the next election cycle. It's always phrased in terms of long-term thinking and political strategy. And that's why the Democrats never get anything done, because they're always pushing it off to next time. But there's not going to be a next time if we lose the Senate, which we probably will in 2022. So this could literally
I think they know that. I think they know that, which is why they're holding the current filibuster style, because they want it to block.
That is idiotic, because they need, if they don't pass HR 1, the voting rights bill, for listeners, it's game over for Democrats forever. So keeping the filibuster is an extremely stupid tactical maneuver. And Mitch McConnell has said that when he gets back in power, he's going to get rid of the filibuster and just push everything through.
Yeah.
So why are Democrats doing this to themselves? Because they don't want to get shit done. You know, they don't want to take any bold stands that are going to make the corporate sponsors unhappy. So there's really no excuse.
They like have it in their back pocket as an excuse when they secretly don't actually want to pass the bill.
Exactly. And even if the Senate were to flip, you know, 2 seats, you know, in 2022, which will likely happen, the House is going to, you know, get rid of everything that the Senate puts forward. It's just going to be the same standstill that we've been in the past, who knows how long.
Yeah.
Actually, it won't, because Democrats compromise with Republicans. So under the Trump administration, with a Democratic House and a Republican Senate, Democrats in the House passed a lot of legislation that the Senate Republicans passed. And it's just Republicans refusing to do the same, even when it benefits the American people, even though that is literally how you form a governing coalition and have a functional government. So they have no interest in playing by the rules. They haven't for decades. And the Democratic leadership just needs to wake up to that reality and embrace it, because we can't be playing by a set of rules that, first of all, are made up and made to instill white supremacy, and second of all, that aren't being respected at all by the other side. It doesn't make any sense to fight with one hand tied behind your back when that is literally your choice. No one is making you do that. So as each week goes by, I get increasingly frustrated with the filibuster issue.
Yeah. I also do want to call out that Burma, also currently known as Myanmar, Burma, I believe, is actually like the British term that's used for that region.
Yeah, Myanmar was the agreed upon name.
Yeah, I was just using the framing directly from the bill.
Yeah, the U.S. government still refers to it as Burma, even though
that part is wild. That part is bad. Like, we don't call Sri Lanka Ceylon still. So what are we doing?
Depends on who you ask.
And none of the reporting from major media outlets is calling Myanmar Burma. It is literally only this bill.
Yeah. Super antiquated.
It's another way they're behind the times.
Speaking of super antiquated, shall we get into Representative Yay or Nay?
Yeah, let's do it.
So For our listeners, Representative Yay or Nay is a segment that we do each week where we take a look at one of the Democrats in Congress. We try to do like slightly lower profile members of Congress so we can really get a feel for who is in there representing us. And then once we kind of go through their bio and what they believe in, we decide whether we want to give this person a yay or a nay. A yay meaning this is somebody that we have full confidence in, we trust their platform, and if we saw their name on a piece of legislation, we would feel confident that that legislation was fighting for the American people and represented like a position that we could get behind. Nay are for people that A, are terrible, or B, that we have doubts on for whatever reason. So this week, we are looking at a senator from my team. Longtime listeners will have seen this coming. This is my totally favorite, not at all sarcastic about that, Senator Alex Padilla.
Great.
Alex Padilla. So this is the
Do tell.
Alex Padilla takedown episode that everyone has been waiting for. So my personal grudge with Alex Padilla stems from the fact that he is super unproductive in the Senate. His weekly point average is 5 points, which is horrendous.
So bad.
And if you guys will remember a couple episodes back when we talked about Mark Kelly in the Senate, he is also a freshman senator and he gets an average of 24 points a week. So it's not just that Alex Padilla is new, it's that he actively sucks. So
useless.
Besides being useless at Fantasy Congress, we wanted to give everyone a little bit more information about who he is and what he believes in, which is a surprisingly complex question. So Alex Padilla is the junior senator from California. He took office on January 20th, 2021, and his term ends on January 3rd, 2023. So he was appointed by California Governor Gavin Newsom to fill Kamala Harris's vacant seat when she won the vice presidency. A little bit about his background. He is the son of Mexican immigrants who were both working class. His dad worked in a restaurant and his mom worked as a house cleaner. He graduated from MIT with a degree in mechanical engineering, and during that time, he worked his way through college as a janitor. So his political career really took off, kind of skyrocketed after he graduated. So he worked in mechanical engineering very briefly. And then from 1999 to 2006, he was on the Los Angeles City Council, and he was elected when he was only 26 years old. So,
Damn.
For those of you who are not from California or LA specifically, the Los Angeles City Council is a very big deal politically. They have a lot of power over the Los Angeles area. So that is a big political seat in California. Then from 2006 to 2014, he was a member of the California State Senate representing a part of the San Fernando Valley. From 2014 to 2021, he was California's Secretary of State, which is an elected position. So when he first ran for Secretary of State in 2014, the big issue in the race was a plastic bag ban that he had sponsored when he was in the California State Senate. So this legislation means that grocery stores can't give out single-use plastic bags. And this is all throughout California. So if you go to the grocery store in California, you either pay like a small fee for a paper bag or you have to bring your own bags, and that's to cut down on plastics. So there were attack ads about him because of that, which is,
petty, wants to save the environment.
Petty and small, and a great policy that honestly was not at all an inconvenience. If you live under it, people adapted really quickly. So that was dumb. Something else noteworthy, AT&T was one of his biggest donors in that race. But besides AT&T, some of his other big donors were labor unions. As Secretary of State, there wasn't a ton of note that I could find. He gained a reputation as a voting reformer, and under his leadership, California hit 22 million registered voters. I think we should take that with a grain of salt because the 2020 election on its own spurred a huge spike in voter registration nationwide. So that's like saying Brad Raffensperger in Georgia is responsible for like all the newly registered Georgians, which is just not true. So he did get into quite a few public fights with Trump about the votes. So that was of note. So on the issues, he does support ending the filibuster outright, which is great. He also supports abortion rights. And then this is where it gets kind of tricky. So he, on a questionnaire that he filled out as a candidate, it's called the political courage test, and it lets candidates like go through and select statements that they agree with or disagree with. So this can be found online and is a really great resource if anybody wants to check it out for their reps. So on the political courage test, he said that he wants to greatly increase funding for the police and increase funding for the construction of prisons. So that is a terrible position. He also continues to support the death penalty, which is an increasingly hardline view. There's actually a lot of Republican and conservative support now for ending the death penalty. He may have changed this position. There's been a lot of movement in the space since the end of 2020, beginning of 2021, when Trump had the federal government execute people who'd been on death row for a long time in really quick succession. So there has been a lot of evolution on this issue in the political sphere generally, but he has not said that he's changed his position. And he also, continuing to be terrible on criminal justice, he wants to strengthen penalties and sentences for drug-related crimes. It is unclear whether this extends to marijuana. So in 2016, California voted to legalize weed. Before that vote actually happened, he did not make any statements on where he stood on the issue. But after it passed, he helped implement legalization by licensing cannabis businesses, because that was literally his job as Secretary of State.
Because he had to.
But I haven't found any indication that he supports getting people out of prison who were convicted for crimes that are no longer crimes, or anything about federal enforcement. So it looks like he's still pretty bad on marijuana. Some of his other worrying stances. So he said on the same questionnaire that he wants to only slightly increase welfare, which I thought was particularly concerning compared to the fact that he wants to greatly increase funding for the police. So it kind of shows you where his priorities are. He also supports increased work requirements for able-bodied welfare recipients. This is a Bill Clinton level policy in terms of being bad. So the welfare system that we had in this country was like pretty solid until Bill Clinton's term, when he imposed really onerous work requirements for welfare recipients. So now if you fall under the income levels and can receive welfare, you have to meet very stringent work requirements, including like constant interviews, constant monitoring. It is a problem, especially for women with young children, and it's just completely unnecessary when it comes to having a social safety net. So that is a very regressive position. He also only slightly wants to increase corporate taxes. He opposes affirmative action in education and employment, which isn't super surprising because affirmative action is actually illegal in California, based on a referendum that took place in the early 2000s. So what he said about this, I think, is particularly noteworthy. He said, "We must do all we can to outreach to all communities to ensure that they understand employment, contracting, and educational opportunities available to them." So apparently the issue with the lack of diversity in the workforce is because people of color just don't know about the jobs that they could have. So that's whack. He also says he supports universal health care, but he's opposed Medicare for all in the past. He says now that he supports very recently that he supports the Green New Deal, but he's accepted donations from fossil fuel companies in the past. He also used to be pro fracking, and he flopped on that recently. The San Francisco chapter of the Sunrise Movement actually put out a statement that was very, very lukewarm when he was appointed by Gavin Newsom. They said, "We're not confident that Padilla is ready to fight for us." Some other things that are worrying to me, he also has support from Dianne Feinstein, and he's been called her protege. So he used to work for Dianne Feinstein. And for those of you who don't know, Dianne Feinstein is terrible. She's the one who told Gavin Newsom to appoint him. Couldn't find anything on where he stands on reparations or on Indigenous rights. He's pretty good on LGBTQ plus rights. He was a co-sponsor of the Equality Act. And then there's immigration. So he chairs the Senate Immigration Subcommittee. But he's been pretty vague on what he wants, honestly, and he seems to have a very moderate position. So a lot of the articles, it was actually very frustrating researching this, because when it talked about immigration, instead of talking about his policies and his ideas, it would immediately go into his personal background and his identity with having two parents who migrated from Mexico, and then not say anything else about him. So it seems like that's kind of like used a little bit as the narrative by the media and potentially by his own campaign to deflect from his actual beliefs, which is frustrating. So he has said he wants to create a pathway to citizenship for undocumented essential workers. He wants to streamline the process for quote unquote legal immigration, which is a problematic framework. He wants to reunify families, and he wants to fix the asylum system. So he said that he's essentially aligned with Biden's plan on immigration, which is a pretty moderate stance. Legislation. So he has co-sponsored 54 pieces of legislation. Some noteworthy ones include Warren's bill on creating a green transportation infrastructure grant program, a bill to conserve monarch butterflies, which I was actually really excited to see because monarch butterfly territory goes through California. And even in my childhood, I've seen the sites where they go during migration be seeing like the population's decimated because of development, because of trucking rules, because of environmental concerns. So it seems small, but I was actually really excited to see that. And he's also one of 4 co-sponsors on a bill to admit Puerto Rico as a state. Scandals. So the Washington Post declared him, quote unquote, free of scandal, but I did find a couple of things. So this isn't his fault, really, but it's still interesting. So apparently there was a lot of pressure on Gavin Newsom in filling Kamala Harris's seat. So this pressure was coming from prominent Black leaders in California specifically because they wanted him to nominate a Black woman to the Senate. And this is because since Kamala Harris left the Senate, there are no Black women at all in the Senate. So the Senate has like not a one Black woman. And there were a lot of people who were really qualified for this. So people in particular wanted Karen Bass or Barbara Lee. There are a lot of Black women in the House from California who are really great and who would have been a great fit. So this decision to not nominate a Black woman was called a terribly insensitive decision by some Black leaders because it was in the midst of our whole national reckoning-ish with racial justice. He also appointed Alex Padilla because they're personal friends. So Alex Padilla said that their relationship was, quote unquote, absolutely a factor in his selection.
Maybe not something to brag about.
Yeah, so I feel like this is kind of similar-ish to what we talked about with Steve Cohen, being like a white man in his district and Black leaders being opposed to this. However, I think that this one is a little worse because unlike Steve Cohen, Alex Padilla does not have a track record of fighting for the people. In fact, his track record looks pretty sparse to me from my review. And it was also based on like friendship. So it seems overall like there's this class of California politician that is very wishy-washy on what they actually believe and very politically opportunistic. So the circle in California politics is kind of tight, like Kamala Harris, Gavin Newsom, Javier Becerra, Alex Padilla, like they were all in kind of like the echelons of California leadership, and they're all very non-committal. I would say Javier Becerra is the best one of these 4, but the rest of them and like a lot of other California politicians like them, like they're just very hard to pin down on what they believe. And it seems like they're the type of politicians who are more in it for the seat than they're in it for their ideals. So that really does worry me. He also immediately started raising money for his re-election campaign, which is kind of predictable, but long running theme of the pod is that Alex Padilla is not doing very much in the Senate. So the fact that his own reelection was his number one priority right away is also concerning to me. So I will open it up to you guys.
I mean, it sounds like he's one of these big business opportunist types. He might be for the Green New Deal as a requirement for businesses in the future. You're going to have to kind of be for that. With regards to Medicare for All, it sounds like he wasn't actually for Medicare for All, but for some nebulous sort of single payer healthcare system. There's no reason to name something, to pick a different name for it when there's already an avenue for it. So I'm gonna probably give him a nay, but I would expect him to vote on the party lines as necessary.
So one of the things that I did notice, and I want to check this between Alex Padilla and Mark Kelly, in terms of like maybe somehow trying to understand why his scores are so low. He is, I guess, only on 5 committees, which, to be honest, is actually not that low of a number. So he really doesn't even get a pass there.
Yeah.
So he's on the committees. He's the chairman of the Immigration, Citizenship, and Border Security Subcommittee. So
yeah.
What is he doing? What the hell?
And he said that he wants to be a national leader on immigration. So the fact that that leadership has yet to materialize is problematic.
I'm kind of seeing a trend, at least from the way that you've described him, of like him just being in positions of power and then like not really doing a whole lot.
And then stepping to the next thing as soon as it's there.
Yeah. So it seems like he's, really following his previous footsteps of that history of inaction.
So yay, nay, where are you at?
Definitely a nay. I'm going to give him a nay for sure.
Yeah, I'm going to nay him as well because I just don't trust him. And I think his story is truly amazing. Like what his family went through is amazing. But that is all he talks about. He like never is talking about the people. Like Bernie's always bringing it back, even though he's had a really amazing life. And I feel like Alex Padilla is kind of using his identity as a crutch in this way that I think is like a little insidious and that we actually see a lot in the Biden administration because he's not really fighting for immigrants. He's just saying you should support me because I'm from your community, which has merit. But I want to see people out there who are really fighting for their people, like fighting for everyone because we are all, I'm getting so cheesy, but we're the people and we want people who are going to fight for us. And Alex Padilla does not seem like somebody who's fighting for the people.
No, it seems like he's fighting for himself. I look forward to seeing him running in 2024.
Yeah, 2022. Yeah, because his term ends beginning of 2023.
No, I'm talking presidential election.
Oh, yeah. We already have people who are gunning for his Senate seat. So like Katie Porter might make a run for it, or Adam Schiff. So should be interesting. Some more progressive people who might want it.
Okay. All right. Well, we're going to take a quick break. And when we get back, Chandan is going to review some of the immigration bills that passed this week.
All right. You guys want to hear about this American Dream and Promise Act 2021?
Yeah, bring it on.
HR 6, American Dream and Promise Act 2021. All right. So this bill was sponsored by actually a Democratic representative from Los Angeles, Representative Lucille Roybal Allard. I don't know if I'm saying her name right, but okay. So what does it actually do? So essentially what it does is it allows individuals so these are the requirements for immigrants to get some protections from this bill. So individuals who are 18 years of age or younger, who were 18 years of age or younger before January 1st of 2021, you have to have not ordered, incited, assisted, or otherwise participated in the persecution of any person on account of race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion.
So that's like a classic immigration requirement. For the listeners, back in another life, I was an immigration attorney. So I helped clients prepare immigration applications. mainly asylum, VAWA, and U visas. And on all those applications, they have these like long requirements like that you can't have persecuted anyone, tortured anyone, murdered anyone. You can't have specifically been a Nazi during Nazi Germany. So just imagine me having to ask all these like poor immigrant women all these questions. It was really awkward.
Excuse me, sir, you're 28. Were you a Nazi?
Yeah. And you also have to ask if they were ever a sex worker. Well, but not in those terms because it's the American government. So having to ask my clients if they were a prostitute was also not fun. And in my opinion, like not super relevant to whether they merit being able to immigrate. But continue.
They also cannot have a felony or misdemeanor offenses. There is a clause saying that certain misdemeanors may be waived for humanitarian purposes, family unity, or otherwise in the public interest. So I thought that was interesting. They also go into a lot of detail about if you have any misdemeanors related to that immigration process in terms of like a traffic violation, or like, for example, if someone, like a small kid was in like the back of a car and like on the immigration there, like there was some sort of like traffic incitement, whatever it might be, and like that kid was like, part of that, like that would not be counted towards these 3 misdemeanors. They also have to have obtained a high school diploma or GED, or have been admitted to a college. And then 5 years immediately preceding the date of their application, they could not have knowingly, willfully, or voluntarily participated in offenses committed by a criminal street gang with the intent to promote or further commission such offenses. So they basically couldn't have been part of a gang 5 years prior to them applying. There's also an application fee, which I think is really wild.
That's also typical, and they're usually very expensive.
Yeah, so it says it can be no greater than $500.
That's actually cheaper than most of them. Like the Trump administration, in the last year, they made a lot of like the asylum fees and the naturalization fees like upward of $1,000. And they also made it way harder to get a fee waiver. So a lot of my low income clients, it used to be pretty easy to get a fee waiver, and now it's like a lot more difficult.
Yeah. So yes, there is a fee waiver as well. And then, if they are eligible, they do have to go through a background check. And just kind of some other things that are in here. If you were a past DACA recipient and were eligible for renewal, before the program ended, there's language in there to fast track them to get that renewal of their DACA, like basically their protections. If their application, also if an applicant meets all of their requirements except for the educational ones. So for example, if they're like, 5, right? Like they meet everything, but like they just haven't gotten a high school education or a GED for like obvious purposes. They basically say in here that like it will be illegal to remove them, and that they will, in quote unquote, be given provided a reasonable opportunity to meet the educational requirements. So they won't necessarily actually be given DACA. So it's or like these protections, but they will be given the opportunity to meet the educational requirement to get those protections. So it seems like having a GED, having a high school degree, or like being admitted into a college, like is necessary in order to get these protections, which I thought was interesting. Also, if the application is denied, the immigrant will basically be given like a notice articulating like why that was, and also like all the evidence related to supporting that decision for denying them, and they have like 90 days to respond to that. And they also, like any applicant that seeks like a judicial review of this will be like given a counsel for that. And so apparently if they do get the protections, it's like going to be there for 10 years, but with some conditions. And essentially like these conditions are like, if you don't meet these conditions, then you're basically stripped of your protections. But if like you do meet certain conditions, then like they will be permanent. And essentially if you do the like inciting of like persecution, blah, 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 they'll strip you of your protection.
And just to be clear, getting stripped of your protections means that you immediately get put into like the deportation system.
Yeah. Also, if you abandon your residence within the United States, that puts you in the deportation category. And they like have some clauses in here in terms of like indicating to the government when you do need to like take some sort of trip and like all this type of stuff. So they have stuff in there for that. And then, but if you do get a college degree or have at least completed 2 years in good standing, then your protections become permanent after the 10 years. If you serve in uniformed services for at least 2 years, and if you are discharged, you receive an honorable discharge, then your protections become permanent. And also, if you like demonstrate earned income for a period of 3 years, or totaling to like 75% of the time that you have like valid employment authorization, then also after those 10 years, your protections become permanent. So those are like the primary aspects of the bill.
So get in college debt, go to war, or be rich. Were those the 3 requirements? Get into college debt, go to war, or learn to make a bunch of money?
Yeah, essentially, yes. Yeah, that's correct.
And just to be clear, like when you say make the protections permanent, that just means you won't be stripped of DACA. That does not mean that you're a naturalized US citizen. You still have to go
correct
the naturalization process. And I'm assuming there are like a few year time limits before you can apply for naturalization.
I did not see that in the bill. But I wouldn't be surprised if it's in there somewhere.
Yeah. So how immigration categories of protection typically work is that once you get the status and you're approved, which in and of itself can be a process that's like from 2 to 10 years. Once you're approved, then you have like a 2 to 3 year waiting period before you can apply for naturalization, which is a multi-year process in and of itself. So anyone who's trying to become a naturalized US citizen is probably in it for 10 years, like minimum, from start to finish. It's a very long process and it's very arduous.
So apparently they cannot apply for naturalization while they're within this 10-year period. So they can apply for naturalization for 10 years.
Oh, wow.
That sounds like the US government, yeah.
Temporary residence pass in those 10 years, and then after that, you can start applying for residency.
Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, what that means is like your mobility is restricted. You can't vote. You're not a citizen. You can't go visit your home country or anywhere else outside of the US for longer than like a very short period. And you have to tell the government every time you leave the country. So it's not like, oh, you're basically a citizen. You're just not quite there yet. It comes with a lot of restrictions. You live in fear. Like a new administration could come in and revoke your status.
Yep. Also, if you're not working for 75% of the time that you have like a work visa, you're out.
Wow.
Like that's wild.
Don't get fired.
Yeah, don't get fired.
Don't get problems at work. Don't you dare to unionize.
So a little bit of stuff on this. So the GOP have been ablaze about this bill. They've been saying that basically that this act incentivizes a border surge. They are also like basically GOP leadership is urging senators to vote no on the bill. There's also, but from the Democrats' side, there was an article that came out 10 hours ago that said that Dick Durbin says that he's close to getting the votes needed to pass the DREAM Act in the Senate, like with the filibuster in mind. So getting the 60 votes.
I would hope so, because this bill is so limited.
Right. It doesn't really.
This is a compromise on a compromise.
Bare minimum. Yeah. There was also a statement that came up from the ACLU saying that they just urged like the administration to to pass this bill, or for the Senate to pass this bill. It didn't, I mean, the ACLU statement didn't seem, it just said it was like a crucial step forward. But the sense that I got from their statement is that like this wasn't really enough.
Yeah, this is like the most incremental move forward that you can have in regards to not even immigration, but just like the dreamers.
Just like, okay, so basically what this bill does is takes children and young adults who are in this country, who have been in this country, and who have always experienced life as Americans, giving them legal status, which should be beyond question, because without that legal status, these children are living on the margins of society and can easily be, I don't want to go all think of the children, but if you're putting people in a second-class citizen status and they're going to be here no matter what, all you're doing is harm and leaving them ripe for exploitation. So it's crucial that these people be protected. However, I think the framing of DACA is extremely problematic. I'm really glad DACA exists, but I do not like how it separates out like the innocents from like the criminal immigrants. So basically the logic behind DACA is that these people were brought here as children, so they didn't know they were breaking the law, which I think is very, very problematic because it casts everybody with knowledge of immigration law as a criminal, when laws around border crossing are extremely arbitrary and our system of immigration is like very punitive. So calling crossing the border breaking the law is already like, that doesn't have to be a necessary thing at all. That's just breaking the law because it's an arbitrary rule of the US government. So honestly, what I would like to see is a uniform system for everyone who's in this country or coming into this country to come in freely, register with the government, and immediately have a process of immigrating that they can go through if they want to. I think that this country really needs people coming in for our workforce and just to keep our population like having young people and not just be like old people. Like, in order to be a functioning economy with our aging population, we need a new influx of people and a new influx of workers. So why not just remove this entire second-class citizen status that we've created for not just for children who came here, but for everybody who comes here? There is a whole group of people who is ripe for exploitation and for being paid way under the minimum wage, for sexual abuse, for trafficking, that is just completely unnecessary. So I really think our immigration system should take out these arbitrary classifications and become a more welcoming, unified, like streamlined system where when you come in, like the government would know who you are and where you're working and what you're doing, but it wouldn't be the system of like living in fear and punitive carceral enforcement. I think the counter argument to that is typically that we don't want people, quote unquote, flooding our borders. But how many people can really come in? You know, like a lot of people are coming to the border now because of legitimate humanitarian crises that are occurring in their countries that the US caused. So if they're not going to stop coming just because we say, oh, we're going to incarcerate you and your children if you come. So why not focus on like helping fix their problems at home so that more people aren't in the situation of having their home country be untenable? I just think the way that we've approached it is entirely backwards.
No, the way we've approached it is perfectly in line with our military industrial complex.
Absolutely.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Is a little incremental thing that means that a fraction of the dreamers get to stick around if they jump through all these hoops, and the rest of them, well, good luck. The Democrats tried.
I mean, it basically is like we're saying they're like, okay, you can come in, but you're going to be on like a 10 years house arrest, essentially. Where like in like an Asian household where all you can do is study. But like, yeah, I mean, it really is the bare minimum. I mean, I would hope they could find 60 votes for this. in the
It doesn't
Senate.
even do anything, so like it should be an easy 60.
I mean, it will help, it will help the few people that fall into this category. It is a really, really big deal for them. It's just a shame that that category isn't bigger. And I also hate the line drawing between quote unquote good, worthy immigrants and quote unquote bad, unworthy immigrants with the education requirements. Typically, people aren't able to complete their GED, their high school education, their college education because of poverty and because of the conditions that go along with poverty, like
They're working to
violence,
stay alive. I mean, like,
having to
when do they have time
work,
for school?
being traumatized, not receiving adequate services or adequate food or adequate shelter or water. So punishing people for that and making them be forced to live even more on the margins is just a recipe for, like, what are they going to do? If you can't live legally in the society, your only option is to exist in the realm of illegality, which just leads to like more crime and other things that are going to negatively affect these people in their communities. So I think that is a really, really big misstep.
Yeah. And even just seeing that the sponsor of this bill, like, sponsored a 2012 family reunification bill just goes to show me like how bad the Biden Obama slash, mainly Biden view of things, like how bad they are in immigration.
Oh,
Like, it's just awful.
don't let Obama off the hook. The deporter
Yeah.
in chief, literally.
Yeah, totally. I mean, but Biden was right there, and he's continuing the exact same policies, and this is super fucking weak. Like, and it's like,
Yeah, the Biden administration is actually enforcing a hardline immigration rule that the Trump administration put in as they were going
yep,
out
I
the
saw
door.
that.
Yeah, they're defending it in court. It's basically a rule that restricts what immigrants can present in court to prevent themselves from being deported. And the judge was even confused, like, why are you guys still defending this? You don't have to be defending this. You're not.
Yeah.
It's literally a Jeff Sessions policy, and Biden's administration is going to bat for this policy. So it just shows you, if they think they can sneak by and take actions that continue to harm immigrants, they'll do it.
Absolutely. It's really frustrating too to see this being propped up as like big immigration bills being passed by the Democrats.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So the other one was the Farm Workforce Modernization Act, which, I went and dug into a little bit because it was being shown as a sort of pathway to citizenship for agricultural workers who have been living here illegally for an extended period of time. Once you break it down and look in a little bit further, it's like you have to have been working for 10 years before this bill has been enacted. And
Just
then
love those 10 years.
And then after that, you need to have worked for 4 years as approved agricultural worker, which there are not that many ways to get that. You need to have worked for the past 2 years, 180 work days. And then if you haven't done that, then you need to have worked for less than 2 years for less than that 10-year period, but then you have to work for another 8 years as a certified agricultural worker. So you're talking anywhere from like 12 to 14 years before you can even become a permanent citizen, let alone a naturalized citizen.
And I can't stress enough the evidentiary issues with this bill. So it is essentially impossible for an undocumented person to prove that they were employed as a farm worker for 10 years. Because if you're undocumented, you're working in situations where you're at the table, you do not have a contract, your employer pays you in cash, so you're not going to have a pay stub. You're not going to be down in their records because they're not going to want to get caught. They're not going to go to the federal government now and say, oh yeah, we employed this undocumented person for 10 years, because they could face penalties for doing that. So if you're an undocumented person seeking relief under this bill, all you have to go on is your own word. And the US government, let me tell you, does not respect the words of immigrants very highly. Like, you need corroborating evidence to support your immigration cases, or they're not going to believe you. And I just see this as an impossible situation for these farm workers, because you're giving up your own position as an undocumented person, your employer as a safe employer for undocumented people. I use the word safe very broadly because a lot of people who do employ undocumented people engage in really exploitative labor practices, both in terms of wage theft and sexual abuse. And you're potentially giving up other undocumented people who continue to work for that employer because the US government, once they find out that employer so-and-so is employing undocumented people, they can do workplace raids and try to round up undocumented people working on that farm. So it is an insanely risky type of relief to apply for that doesn't seem like very many people are going to qualify for or be approved for.
Mm-hmm. And on top of that, you also have to pay $1,000 penalty fee. The penalty being that you came over the border illegally. How dare you try and find a better life?
And there's no fee waiver for that, correct?
I did not see that on the bill.
Yeah, I mean, you would see it if they allowed a fee waiver, it would be there. So yeah, that is the people who get paid the lowest wage, well below minimum wage in our society, having to fork over $1,000 for this immigration application that may get denied. And that's not even including the fees for background checks, passport photos, and naturalization application fees, which are also hundreds of dollars.
It's ridiculous too. So the American Dream and Promise Act and this Farm Workforce Modernization Act have both previously passed the House. It's not the first time these have been introduced. They've been around since 2013. And it's really the exact same fight that Obama was fighting is still going on here. So
it's also important to note, I'm just realizing that not one person from the squad co-sponsors this bill.
Yeah, because it doesn't do anything.
Not even one. Actually, no, Paramela Jayapal does.
She's not in the squad, though.
She's not technically in the squad. No.
I wouldn't call her squad.
No, but she's on my team, so I'm disappointed.
You can be part of your squad, Jenna.
She's part of my squad. Brown squad. No, Talib's on there.
Okay. I think it's very telling and also very sad that these same bills have been around since 2013 because the world has changed a lot. America
so bad.
is still extremely racist, but there has been more public discourse about the impact of
2012.
Yeah, racially unfair policies since 2012, including discrimination against immigrants, specifically Muslims, specifically Latino people, Asian people, Black people, all of whom make up categories of immigrants to this country. So you would think that the realm of immigration would have seen some progress, but it's the same punitive, bureaucratic, onerous requirements that are extremely difficult to navigate. Even being an immigration attorney was so difficult under Trump because they made ridiculous requirements. Like one of the requirements that a lot of my applications that I filled out, sorry clients, kept getting bounced back for was that you had to fill out every single possible blank on every single possible form with not applicable. And these were fillable PDFs. So there would be a ton of fields that were not fillable in the PDF. So you'd have to fill out all your documents completely, print them out, multiple copies, hundreds of pages, and then go through by hand and write not applicable in every single space. And if you missed a single space, it would be sent back to you. Then you'd have to resend everything back. I had to do this so many times and it was so frustrating. And I wasn't just like a terrible attorney. This was just a really onerous requirement that's completely unnecessary. And if you're an undocumented person who's new to the English language, who doesn't have representation, it's literally impossible to navigate this system. And we shouldn't have those barriers to entry, those unnavigable systems, because your ability to navigate a bureaucratic system says nothing about like your worth as a human being.
Yeah, totally.
Agreed, 100%. God, it's so frustrating that nothing has progressed. Literally nothing has progressed since 2012 within our own government. And we're still fighting these exact same battles, all under the moniker of progress, right? It's all under this banner of like, oh, no, we're making some big progressive like legislation here. I mean, I saw all these people, there were all these Republicans fighting these two bills that they previously provided, like had supported, just because who knows, because it's coming from Biden this time, because it's coming at a time where the Republicans can weaponize immigration a little bit more than usual. Who knows?
I will say, despite how weak this bill is, even my mom, who is like a staunch anti-Trump person and like a very strong like liberal, was just like, oh, like these bills are like making like all these people like flood the border. Like she thinks that this bill it's just like, and there's nothing in here. It's not there's nothing in here, but like it's just like it's just so
because
bad.
Democrats do not go to bat for immigrants in this country. Everyone just lets the right set the narrative for what's happening with immigration. And that narrative is that all of these unworthy and in some cases like subhuman people are flooding the country. They have no right to be here. They're committing a crime by coming in. They're going to steal your job. They're going to destroy the country. And that's just factually not correct. And it's also really fucked up and racist. Like that narrative that there's any level of like worthiness or unworthiness for people who are American, born in America versus people who are not. It's just a really repulsive viewpoint, and it should be completely at odds with everything the Democratic Party stands for. But the Democratic Party doesn't stand for anything. So
No. I've also noticed that Democrats just love not going to bat for their own policies. They just don't like. I found it so wild that Biden decided to do this like national tour for the like I think it was like the COVID relief package after it passed.
Yep.
After the bill passed. To just be like, look at this shit that we did, like not even before it, to gain support to pass.
It was a Trump victory lap. Like they literally were doing exactly what Trump did with the rallies. And then conveniently for them, they were already coming to Atlanta and then there was a shooting. So they turned it into like, oh, we're going to Atlanta to express our condolences. No, you weren't. You were coming here to brag about your one piece of legislation that you passed.
All you did was pass the UBI for babies.
Yeah, just helping the rich babies.
One quick thing, Chandan, that I forgot to mention is that so for the Farm Modernization Act, Workforce Modernization Act, you would have had to have been in this country working for 2 years beforehand. There's no way that this is going to affect future immigration if this is a one-time bill that is retroactive. And instead of
same with Dreamers, same with the Dreamer.
Yeah.
The problem is Democrats aren't going up here and explaining any of that. They're just letting the Republicans run rampant and say, oh no, people are going to start flooding the border again.
That's a great point. You had to have been here since January 1st of this year. So all the people that are coming over, like literally completely inapplicable for this.
Also, who cares? Like the US has always been the place where people like children have had to come from other countries to make a better life. That is literally the DNA of this country. And if we had the immigration policies that we have today, back when they were letting in Irish people and Serbian people and all the other people that were considered like non-white and non-worthy at the time, then like none of my ancestors sure as hell would have been here. None of most people's ancestors would be here, like Germans, Italians.
Sorry, Chad, I'm back to India. I'm going back to Puerto Rico myself.
I will say though, I mean, I was actually like thinking about this vaguely in terms of like, I wonder what like Native American populations feel about something like the DREAM Act. But like, to be perfectly honest, land crossing, like land immigration is far more like actually legit than like flying over in a plane from India to here, like I'm sure native populations would be far more open to having like native fucking like Mexican, Central American, South American immigrants who are probably kin, with the individuals who are in the United States to some degree because they're just from there.
Yeah.
Than like a bunch of random people flying from outside of the country.
I mean, I don't want to speak for Native people, but I think they don't give a fuck about our borders and they see our borders as
totally
because they are. I mean, if it just doesn't make any sense to make this arbitrary distinction between people born like 10 minutes over the border in Tijuana versus like 10 minutes on the other side. It just makes absolutely no sense. And we would be so much better served if we treated our country as one country among many in our region of the world. So working more closely with Mexico and Canada, and then broadly within the Western Hemisphere, and then even more broadly within the rest of the world. Like if we saw our identity first and foremost as being like human beings, I'm getting super corny again, but it's like hyper identification with a nation state and a government does not serve the interests of humanity as a whole. And it can lead to some really destructive like tribalism and nationalism that can get super Nazi super quickly.
Yeah, totally.
Mic drop.
do we want to talk about the shootings at the of Asian women, since we're all in Atlanta?
Yeah, we should. It's super tragic, and one of the things that I think is even more tragic is the media's assumption, and well, not even more tragic, but obviously the shootings are the most tragic thing, but it's really fucked up that in this moment of tragedy for these families, the media is assuming that the women who were killed were sex workers because they're Asian women working in massage parlors. I found no evidence for that based on the reporting that I've seen. So the promulgation of that is purely a racist myth. Even if they were sex workers, it wouldn't matter. But assuming that Asian women working in this country are sex workers by default is really fucked up.
Yeah. So apparently this guy, the person who was the shooter, like as soon as he turned 21, he like went and got a gun and did this.
Wow.
So he was just waiting. He was just waiting to turn 21 so that he could technically legally purchase this gun and shoot up like all of these individuals.
He bought the gun on the same day.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the thing is, like, I mean, in the whole like sexual frustration situation goes completely out the window when you look at that. I mean, like
even so, even if that's what you want to blame it on, like normal people don't murder people when they're sexually frustrated.
Just white people.
Seriously.
Frustrated white people. I mean, honestly, I feel like we could chalk up so many of the issues that have led to like just like a lot of the issues that we're having in this country to sexually frustrated young white men.
I mean,
you know, like
these are people who
racism and capitalism also are very important factors in that.
Sure. I agree. But it just seems like a key demographic in all of this.
I mean, I think that's something that the media is like starting to recognize, is that all these things are not separable. I've seen actually some really good reporting on the fact that no, it's not that they're women or that they're Asian. It's that they're Asian women specifically. And it's like, fucking finally, the media is recognizing that people's identities are intersectional and that people don't experience the world across the plane of like white or male or like American. It's all these things all at once that are happening. For anyone who wants to learn more about this topic and who wants a really great breakdown of what intersectionality is, I'm going to drop a link to Kimberly Crenshaw's article that coined the term intersectionality and really breaks down what it is and how to explain it, because she can explain it a lot better than I can. It is truly fundamental reading for anyone who gives a shit about the world. So check it out in the episode notes, and that is all I have to say about that.
I do want to put one quick shout out from our intel at NASA. If you guys are unaware, Joe Biden announced his intent to nominate Bill Nelson for the NASA.
Like the lead?
To be the senior leader. Yeah, to be the leader of NASA. Anyway, this is a white guy. This is, and I quote, an ex-politician NASA fanboy with no aerospace engineering experience other than paying for a ticket to go to space on the space shuttles in the 80s.
Mic drop.
Wow.
Literally buying a position at NASA.
Looking forward to seeing that confirmation in the coming weeks or so.
So this is like the DeJoy of NASA?
Basically.
Great. We really needed
some
that.
Floridian ex-politician who, really loved NASA, and Biden was like, hey, you're a white guy that's 78 years old. I'm a white guy that's 78 years old. Let's make you in charge.
I'll give you anything you want.
Right?
Literally,
Yeah.
why would I'm sorry to Florida, but Florida notoriously does not have its shit together. So why are we nominating anyone from Florida for
Right?
anything?
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah.
All right. I think that's it for this week. Thank you guys. We'll look forward to the coming weeks.